Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda Pittman and I talk about faith, confidence, and lifestyle from a Christian woman's perspective. In this video, we're going to cover what I consider the 5 most obvious signs that God is calling you higher. The first sign that God is calling you higher is that your environment shifts. Certain assignments in your life are seasonal, and you're going to see changes in your environment based on the change in your assignment. Now, this change in your environment can also be a change in your social circle. There's a quote that I love, and it goes, "God will change your circle to change your life." And that couldn't be more true. I've seen it time and time and time again in my own life, in the life of my loved ones. Your purpose is tied to people, and you're going to see God work through you for the sake of people. If you're connected to the wrong individuals who do not see as God sees, who do not see God's plan for your life as you see it, who can't view you accurately, if their voice doesn't align with God's voice, it may tempt you to be flat out disobedient. But if you choose your friends wisely and you choose your circle wisely, then they'll be able to see for you even when you can't see for yourself. I even think about the life of Jesus. When you look at Jesus right after he was baptized, he went into the wilderness, he was tempted by Satan, and then after he came out of the wilderness, the first thing he did is he went and he got himself some disciples. He said, "Come and follow me." Whenever he did that, he had people who ran with him. In this next season, whenever God is calling you higher, you're going to need to have people who can walk with you and run with you. Your shift in environment can also be quite literal. What do I mean by that? Sometimes God will move you to a new city, move you to a new state, move you to a new school, a new job. These environment shifts become destiny moments. I think about my relationship with my husband. I didn't even know about my university, SMU, whenever I applied to it. I had heard somebody else in an orchestra that I was in talk about it, and I just thought to myself, okay, I'll look into it, and I found that SMU in Dallas had this incredible music program. And so I applied, I got in, I absolutely loved the university. And I was in this 8 a.m. art of acting class. And that's where I met my now husband, Michael Pittman. It's so crazy to think about because if I hadn't gone to that university and I went to maybe TCU like I thought of going to, or UNT like I thought of going to, then I wouldn't have met my husband. Or even if I didn't even sign up for that class, I would have never met my husband. And that was a huge destiny assignment. Do not think light of where God has you right now or where God is shifting you to, especially if it's different than what you expected. You'll never know who or what is on the other side of that. So the first sign that God is calling you higher is that your environment shifts. The next sign that God is calling you higher is that your identity shifts. Whenever we're in Christ, we are a new creation. The old has passed away and the new has come. And so we are given a new identity in Christ. However, we're not necessarily given a new identity in the eyes of other people. But all throughout the Bible, whenever God uses someone, I see that how people identified them in their past looks different whenever God starts to use them for a higher calling. People start to identify them in a new way. Before Abraham was Abraham, he was Abram. And the name Abram means exalted father. And then God changed his name to Abraham, which means father of many nations. Abram wasn't known as that, nor was Abraham known as that for quite a long time. But as time progressed and his calling unfolded, it's undeniable that he is the father of many nations. And now that's how we all identify Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. That's what we think about all the time. That's how the rest of us identify him. So if you start to see signs like, people are not identifying me the same way they used to. Maybe they used to identify me as the lip gloss girl, but now they're identifying you as the Jesus freak. If you start to see people coming to you for different reasons, identifying you in different ways, that's a good sign that God is calling you higher. When other people start to confirm the change that God has already made in you, that's a good sign that God is calling you higher. God also changed Jacob's name to Israel. He also changed Saul's name to Paul. We see these name changes, and these identities are not automatically adopted by everyone else until it's undeniable. For a lot of people, Jacob was known as the supplanter. He was known as the trickster. But now we know Jacob as Israel. Now we know Jacob as the foundation of the Israelites. Now notice that God shifted their identity first, and then everyone else caught on. So if God is calling you higher, you first need to know how God identifies you. You ask him very directly, God, how do you identify me? How do you see me? What do you think about me? What have you called me to? And if he gives you something new, you cling to that and everybody else is going to catch up. I'll give you an example from my own life. Back whenever I was in Atlanta, there was a time where I was really struggling with my sense of self. I had kind of gone through a quarter life crisis. I think I was maybe like 23 or so. At this time, I was a mom and a wife, a young mom and wife at that. It was really challenging for me to kind of navigate through being a young wife and a young mom and not feeling like I am my own person anymore. At the time, a friend encouraged me to go ahead and ask God, God, how do you see me? What do you call me? What name do you have for me? So I went upstairs, I laid on my bed, and I just straight up asked God. I said, God, do you have a name for me? God, what do you call me? I need to know. And that's when God told me, you're called to preach, you're called to pray, and you're called to prophesy. That was the first time that God ever told me that I was called to preach or pray or prophesy. I didn't know those things about myself. But now, several years later, 5, 6 years later, I'm very much so identified by others as Amanda who preaches and speaks, or Amanda who has the prophetic gifting, or Amanda, you're always reading my mail, or this is always right on time. Now, that wasn't how people identified me then, and it wasn't even how I identified myself. First, God identified me. Then I accepted that identity, and then everybody else caught up. Whenever God is calling you higher, he is going to define who you are in him. And then you have to actually receive it and believe it, and then everybody else will see it too. The third obvious sign that God is calling you higher is that you hear his voice more. Maybe there's more repetition. Maybe there are more signs. Maybe there are more ways that God is trying to get your attention, and it almost becomes undeniable. There's a Latin phrase that I recently learned, and it goes, repetition is the mother of all learning. Throughout the Bible, there's lots of repetition. You see the 4 Gospels written from 4 different accounts. Lots of repetition. Even throughout the scripture, if something is written 3 times or 2 times, verily, verily, I say to you, it adds emphasis and it says, pay attention to this. And God still has the same character. He understands that we learn from repetition. And so if you start to hear the same messages over and over, if you start to hear the same themes over and over, if you keep going back to the same thoughts and wonders, what if I did this? What if I was called to that? And if you can't shake that, I would lean into that. That is a good sign that God is calling you higher. Now, there was not a time where I was as sensitive to the voice of God as I am now. And one of the things that I found is the less confident you are in hearing the voice of God, the louder his signs will be. And so as you mature in your walk with Christ, you'll notice that you have to lean in more and be a little more sensitive. So if you've been on the journey of hearing God's voice for a long time, if he's calling you to a higher level, that's actually something that you'll probably discover in your own quiet time. Not necessarily you're driving down the road and you see some big sign and it means something to you. Whenever God goes to such great lengths to get your attention, usually, not always, but usually it's a sign that you're not paying attention to the still small voice. Now, God is so gracious to us. I remember whenever I was called to move to Atlanta. I currently live in Dallas. I'm from Dallas. There was a time where I lived in Atlanta. I did ministry there, and I came back. And I remember whenever I was living in Dallas, and God was getting my attention over and over and over again, me and my husband. He was getting our attention over and over and over again about moving to Atlanta. And it was so blatant and obvious and in your face. I mean, we would get phone calls, somebody saying, hey, are you moving to Atlanta? And we wouldn't even confirm. We would just say, why do you ask? And they would say, oh, God told me. Oh, I'm in prayer and I'm like, God, I want you to confirm to me that I'm supposed to be in Atlanta. And then I open up my eyes and the news is on and I see in big bold letters, Atlanta. Just things like that that you just can't shake. Because sometimes we need a little bit more confirmation, especially if it's really outside of our comfort zone. But if God repeats himself, pay attention. John 10:27 says, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. Know that if God is calling you higher, he's calling you by his word. He's calling you by his voice. And he's calling you by his rhema, which is his in the moment spoken word. You have to trust that you belong to him. You are his sheep. You do know his voice. You do know how to be led by the Spirit. And it may at times be uncomfortable. It may at times feel like I'm this crazy person. I'm not even entirely sure what this is, if this is God or if this is me, but I'm just going to go ahead and trust. Whenever you start hearing the voice of God, you actually have to step out on faith before you're even 100% sure it's God. For the majority of people who say, I did this because God told me, or I did this because I heard the voice of God, for most of them, they're maybe 80% sure, maybe 90% sure, maybe 60% sure. But the rest of that percentage that's missing is where faith comes in. What I've learned in my own walk with God is if I think God is saying something and I pray on it and it all seems to check out and I'm still not sure, I'll step out in faith, I'll test it. And once I see that it truly was God, I see the fruit of it, I see the confirmation of it, that tells me, okay, here are the characteristics of the voice of God, and this is how I know it's him. But if I never tested it, then I would never learn that. There have been times where I thought I heard the voice of God, and I would step out on that word, and the fruit that's yielded confirms that it wasn't the voice of God. That is still valuable because you could be learning what the voice of God is, but you could also be learning what the voice of God isn't. I was able to go back and say, here are some of the characteristics that sounded almost like God's voice, but not quite. Next time, I'm going to remember that, and I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. And so if you're new to just stepping out on faith and hearing the voice of God, my advice to you is pray on it and step out in faith, even before you're entirely sure. And that's how you'll actually test and approve and learn God's voice. The fourth sign that God is calling you higher is that you become uncomfortable in your comfort zone. We can only stay in our comfort zone so long when we have a call on our lives. I have never been called by God and it's been comfortable. I have never had a God-given assignment and it's just easy. It just doesn't work that way. There is normally this burdening, this longing, this sense that there must be more than the status quo. There must be more than the way I've been living my life. I can't just settle here. And I want to say this prophetically because I am discerning that there's some of you who are listening right now and you've thought to yourself that you're struggling with contentment and you're just trying to cast that out. Oh, I'm discontent. Let me just get rid of the spirit of discontentment. But God is saying you're not struggling with discontentment because you're discontent with the things in your life or the circumstances in your life. You're discontent because I'm calling you higher and you can't stay where you are. There's a greater call. There's a greater assignment. There's a higher level that I'm taking you to. And this discontentment is actually a spiritual yearning. Your spirit is yearning for what the Spirit of God is calling you to next. And so if you're sensing this burden of, I need to be doing more, or this is not enough, I would lean into that and really ask God, Lord, what is this discontentment? What is this that I'm sensing? And how can I be faithful with this burden? Your flesh loves comfort. And so if you're becoming uncomfortable in comfort, that's not a work of the flesh. That's actually a work of the Spirit. And so lean in not to the flesh, but lean into the Spirit. The Spirit of God is who is leading you and guiding you, which is a good sign because if you're being led by the Spirit, God is always going to call you to more, to greater and higher levels. And last but not least, sign number 5 that God is calling you higher is that the grace has lifted in your current season. I think about the year 2021 whenever I was writing my book, Stand in Confidence. There was a long stint of time where I was locking myself in a room, writing this book that I knew that I was called to. Now, there was so much grace in that season. My husband's work had slowed to just enough to where he can watch the kids a little more while I'm working on my book. Now, it seemed as soon as that season ended and I turned in my manuscript once and for all, boom, 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 things picked up. I wasn't able to just spend all this time in a room anymore. I had to get going. I started planning for this conference, and the grace had lifted off of that season because that assignment was ending. You're going to sense that things that you were doing before do not have the same give, do not have the same level of ease to them. Maybe there are circumstances that are beyond your control that just dramatically change. That grace is lifting, and oftentimes it's a sign that God is calling you higher into what is next for you. Now, some people experience this and they just think that it's an attack from the enemy and they just keep pressing into prayer when in actuality, it's a divine shift from heaven. And rather than trying to pray it away, it's better to go with the flow and trust where God is leading you. Trust the change, lean into the change, embrace the change rather than resisting it. I believe that if you trust God with that change as He's calling you higher, you're going to be able to shift into your next level sooner. The longer you resist change, the longer you delay your destiny. If you're seeing 1, 2, 3 of these in your life, it is a sure sign God is calling you higher. There's a new assignment for you. There's a new level for you. There's a new place God is taking you. And it's not just for you. It's for those you're called to. He's calling you higher so that you can do more for others, so that you can serve to a greater degree, whether it's as a voice, whether it's as an artist, whether it's as a technician, whatever it is, He's calling you higher, not for yourself, but for those you're called to. And so if you think that you're disqualified, if you think you're not good enough, just remember, it's not for you and it's not about you. Let your conviction and your love for others drive you to do what God is calling you to do. Don't let your fear and your insecurity get in the way, but be led by the Spirit of God, because one day you'll be able to see all of the lives you impacted because you said yes to God. Well, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment below, share it, all of those things. I also have all of my social media linked below. I have my books linked below, and I would just love to know what you took away from this video. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next video.